During my live stream last night, I had a lot of people come on telling me that, like, oh, did you know that the Switch 2 has been delayed? You were right. It's coming out in 2025. And I'm just kind of sitting there thinking that, like, wait, no, I didn't say that. I didn't say the Switch 2 was coming out in 2025. Like, I said it wasn't coming out this year. Like, I said it wasn't getting announced, like the way everyone said, right? What I said was that the rumors were not true, right? And I've been saying this for years now. Like, this has nothing to do with the Switch 2. Like, I've been saying this about the Switch Pro. I've been saying this about, like, the NX. Like, this has been happening over and over again in the community, and I think only just now are people starting to realize this. But the community is lying to you. There are no inside sources. There is no like leaking community. It's just a bunch of people making stuff up, and it couldn't be more clear after that insane financial report that Nintendo would be that Nintendo is not replacing the Switch anytime soon. Right? That has become very obvious. And right now, you're still seeing a handful of people like, trying. Right now, you're seeing a lot of people backtrack, right? What you're saying is that, like, oh, the Switch 2 is just coming, but the Switch is doing so well this year that they've pushed it back a little bit, so it'll have more games at launch. Like, they were gonna release it in 2024, but they pushed it back in 2025. This has the same energy to it that these guys relied on back in the Switch Pro days, right? Like during the 2020 period where people got fired up about the Switch Pro, like, oh, it's totally real, guys, and then it never happened. They announced like the Switch OLED, like, oh, they were gonna produce it, but the chip shortages prevented that from happening. Like, it's the same kind of energy. Like, it's a complete and total cope. Like, just a blatant lie. Like, anybody who's been following along with this should be able to tell you that. But right now, we're kind of in this phase where a lot of people are still trying to keep up the facade, or still trying to keep up this idea that, like, oh, the Switch 2, it's coming. It's coming. The Switch is well on its way to being replaced. It's a dying platform. And we were being told, for the past 2 years, that the Switch sales were going down, right? But now we have a little bit more context, right? Now we have like an idea of how well PS5 and Xbox Series X are doing, and they're not doing well. Like, Sony's making statements that, like, oh, we're halfway through the console generation, right? Games like Spider-Man 2 are bombing. Like, nothing's really done this well this gen at all. Right? The idea that, like, Nintendo would have to put out a Switch 2 now to compete with PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X has fallen flat on its face. If anything, like, it was the PS5 and Series X that couldn't compete with the Switch. And right now, you're still seeing people in denial about that. Like, right now, I think you're seeing, like, the death throes of the online gaming community, right? Because a lot of these guys don't like acknowledging that Nintendo has always been a better company. Right? They always like to cope and seethe about this, but what it all comes down to really is that Nintendo produced better hardware, they produced better games, they were more effective at running the business, they were more cost effective. Like, they stomped PlayStation in every single way possible. And yet, like, for the past, like, 25 years, like, you've had people, like, try and pretend the opposite, that, like, oh, it was a massive L that Nintendo lost Squaresoft, right? Like, never mind that they went bankrupt soon after that. Never mind about the movie disaster or, like, the gradual decline of the games. No, because they didn't get Final Fantasy VII and Dragon Quest VII. That was, that was an Enix game, but because they didn't get all these massive RPGs in the PS1 era, it killed the momentum. It killed the brand. But in reality, it was just, like, a coordinated effort by the gaming media, by the Sony controlled outlets to try and go after Nintendo and Sega, right? And Sega folded, right? Like, that's the real reason Sega went under, was because Sony was going after them so long, like, just ruining their brand, just discrediting them at every turn. And I do think the chickens have come home the roost, right? Like, this is, I think, going to be the last generation where anybody could pretend that Nintendo is uncompetitive, right? That is the major shift I've noticed in the past 5 years. Like, actually longer than that. But, like, 10 years ago, it was all about the games, right? Like, people began to notice that, oh, the games are better than the games that are coming out on PlayStation and Xbox. And then that kind of slowly morphed into, like, oh, wait, the hardware is better too. And now, like, you're still seeing, like, people who are still like have drunk the Kool-Aid and still delusionally believe that Nintendo is on the verge of bankruptcy or that Sony won the console war. I just saw a tweet from like Colin Moriarty like saying that like, oh, Sony won the console war. Now they're going to take over PC, like the PC storefront, which is like the most delusional take I think I've ever heard in my life. Right? Like, this is why I think Colin Moriarty is like the absolute like biggest PlayStation show on the planet. Like, it is straight up insane the things that people like him spout off at like every given moment. Like, it's not just like a one-off article where he claims that the PlayStation Vita is going to destroy the 3DS, right? Like, it's his entire career basically revolves around downplaying Nintendo while propping up Sony, and I think that's true for quite a lot of game journalists and a lot of people who don't know what Nintendo is, who don't know about the history of the company, who don't know anything about like the current state of things. Like, they blindly bought into this. Like, they genuinely thought that Nintendo was struggling over the past 25 years, and that really couldn't be further from the truth. Like, I just saw like Sean Malmstrom the other day like release a statement that like, oh, Nintendo struggled during the DS era. Like, they struggled. They were struggling. They were getting outsold by the PSP. And then in reality, like, what happened? Like, the DS outsold it, became the second highest selling console of all time. The PS Vita came out and was a complete bomb. The PlayStation Portable was a disaster in every sense of the word. But you'll never see people acknowledge that, right? Like, I heard of that and I legit began to wonder if like the numbers, the officially reported numbers for the PlayStation Portable, if they were even real. Because looking back on it, like, I only knew like, the people I knew who had PlayStation Vitas, like, they didn't play a lot of games. Like, they got on board with it because of like the multimedia features and the video and like the tech things it was doing, right? Like, it wasn't because of the games. And I think that's why like the iPhone was such a big blow to the brand. It was because like, that was why people got on board with the PlayStation Vita. Like, that was why people were so invested in the brand, why they supported it so much, was because of like, oh man, I can listen to music and watch movies. Like, the reality is like it had nothing to do with the games, right? And that's been the central pillar of PlayStation for its entire lifespan. It's like the popularity of the brand has absolutely nothing to do with games, like nothing. And as a result, now that we have like an industry that's like a bit more established, people like know what they like. There are different genres, different communities like who like different things, who respond to different games, things like that. Um, it it couldn't be more clear that the gaming community cannot like continue the farce essentially. Like, we're at this point now where it does feel as if the narrative that Nintendo is a failure of a company is has just completely collapsed. And I do think like the Switch Pro rumors, like the endless rumors of the Nintendo hardware, like that was a big part of that. Because like, what do we hear every single time these rumors come out? Is that like, oh, Nintendo's gonna drop all of their old strategies. They're gonna stop playing around. They're gonna stop messing around with gimmicks. They're gonna focus on horsepower. They're gonna focus on getting the third-party games on board. They're gonna be just like Xbox and PlayStation. And what happens, right? They don't do that, and everybody turns around and starts saying, "Oh, the console is going to be a flop. It's going to bomb. Yada yada yada." Like, they say this about every Nintendo console. Now you're going to see like game journalists try to point to the Wii U as an example of when they're right, but the reality is they do this every single time. They did it with the Wii. They did it with the 3DS. They did it with the DS. Like, every single time they do this, right? They did it with the Switch. Like every single time they did this. Like the thing about the Wii U is that in that specific instance, like the propaganda actually worked. And I imagine the same is true for like the GameCube as well. But the games the games were still good, right? Like it doesn't really matter how well like a console sells because people are still going to buy the games, they're still going to buy the hardware, and they're still going to be enthusiastic about it if the games are high quality. And Nintendo games have been high quality enough that like they have managed to establish like a very dedicated following that will follow them forever. Like I would say like at least for the next 25 years, they're basically set. And like it's crazy how I can like play stuff like Advance Wars 2. I'm playing that right now for the very first time and just have a blast with it. I've spent all night playing this. PlayStation can't compete with that. Like all they ever had throughout their entire lifespan was just like gaslighting people like, oh, Nintendo's behind the times, they're obsolete, they're outdated, they're boring, they're childish, and people have slowly begun to realize that isn't actually true, right? It was just an attempt at downplaying the brand. And I think with these Switch 2 rumors, like seeing people like start to acknowledge that the rumors were obviously fake, that the people behind them, people like RGT85, people like Nate the Hate, people like that, you know, like these people are not sources that can be relied on. Like they are proving themselves over and over and over again to be making it all up for attention. Like over and over and over again. Like it's not speculation at this point. Like there are too many examples that I can name where these people just completely made stuff up to try and like get clicks for their videos, to try and get attention, to try to keep themselves relevant, to try and push themselves as these hard-hitting game journalists who were leaking all this insider information. But the reality is that none of that was ever true. This is all a conspiracy, and you people need to wake up.